relationships that have been worked out between fungi and plants aren't always happy. They're not always nice. One of the most famous fungi is the humongous fungus up in Oregon. So this was actually funny. Recently, it was made famous again because of Vanilla ISIS, the militia group that took over the federal building up in Oregon, was the Forest Service building for the forest in Oregon that has this giant mushroom. So this mushroom is eating thousands of acres of forest. They've DNA tested all over the forest, and it's all the same mycelium. It's all the same strand of mycelium eating into these trees and popping up more mushrooms, and it's the famous honey mushroom. So to humans, we find it this delicious, wonderful mushroom called the honey mushroom that you can take and make fungi string cheese with the stalk, and then the cap can be sauteed and it's nice and sweet and delicious. But it is a terror to trees. It's also the famous root rot fungus that eats living oak trees if they're in too wet of an environment. So fungi are highly adaptable. They can almost go back into the sea. They can almost go back into the ocean. And the irony of them like seeming like ocean-going creatures is single-celled fungus before they learn to grow into strands is yeast. Yeast is what we use to make fermented beverages by taking away the oxygen and putting them in a completely water-filled environment with all the nutrients they need and feeding them sugar. So they naturally eat sugar, and then what they pee out is alcohol. And so this adaptation to being able to go back in the water, I think it's reflected in their form, in their structure. So a lot of mushrooms look like sea creatures. The lion's mane mushroom, which was growing on a tree right over here last year, there's this beautiful example of one coming out, looks like a sea anemone. It looks like those little flowy hairs that come off of a sea anemone, and it's this ball shape, and it kind of just like grows out like little tendrils reaching out into the environment, like little dangly teeth. There's coral fungus that mimic the shape and look of coral. There's a cauliflower fungus that also looks like some sort of ribbed coral that grows at the base of trees. There's the lobster mushroom, which mimics the smell of seafood and is a parasitic mushroom. It actually coats kind of not so gourmet or just kind of mediocre tasting mushrooms, and it turns them into this delectable gourmet mushroom, expands their size, and makes them look like this giant orange Nerf football. And there's the famous and common oyster mushrooms. There's all these examples of how mushrooms mimic sea creatures and sea smells and can like pull in salts and minerals from the environment. And mushrooms grow most abundantly where there's water, where there's a lot of rainfall. They flourish there. Even though mushrooms do grow in the desert, there's desert shaggy parasols that will push up the hard concrete layer of the desert floor and pop up, you know, after a desert rainstorm. So they're in all environments throughout the world, and they've just kind of learned to adapt to these conditions, but they really thrive where it's like really wet and lush and there's lots of sugar to eat. So where there's lots of trees, a lot of dying trees and a lot of rotting leaf matter. The rotting part mainly comes from fungi, but also, of course, they're in competition with bacteria. So the fungi themselves don't want to rot away too quickly, and especially if they produce a fruiting body, they're going to want to produce something in that's going to be tough enough to resist bacterial rot. And so that's where we get our fungal medicines. So a lot of the fungal medicines come from shelf fungi. Shelf fungi are usually really hard, woody fungi that grow like